Hello there. Now, I've had a lot of requests for Versus episodes. I've done a few of them in the past, but usually I do like quite a long build-up explaining both factions. Considering this series is going to be a little different than that, I'm not bothering with the whole huge amount of episodes of backstory building to an ultimate clash. We're just going to dive straight into it. And in the spirit of that, let's go. This time it's going to be the Borg versus the Cybermen. And these two factions, of course, would never really come into contact with one another because they're from two completely different universes. And yes, argue in the comments about who copied who and who came first. But let's see which one would actually be the most likely to win in an engagement. There is a moth buzzing around me. We'll start with a quick breakdown of each faction. Now, there has to be some ground rules in this, as we are crossing universes. We've got to make some kind of equilibriums for the two powers in general, because there are arguments to be made, maybe not in this instance, but in some instances in the episodes that are coming, where they're from a less technologically sophisticated universe, so the matchup might not be quite the same. So we've got to equalize them in some areas. Notably, as this will be combat, we've got to equalize the weapons at least to some degree. In other words, if it's a faction whose weapons might not necessarily be able to harm the technology of the other, let's make it so they can. Just to simplify this, let's assume that their weapons at least can hurt each other, and we will go from there. Other than that, propulsion, sensor technology, and other things will be the same. I won't give one faction something it doesn't have in its native reality, say for example shields. If they don't have them in their reality, they're not going to get them in these verses. So we're going to get started on that relatively level playing field. Another thing, as I've done in these verses before, the size and disposition of their forces does matter. So if one faction is exponentially bigger than the other, I'm not going to do this as I've got 100 of their ships and 100 of their ships and see who wins. I'm talking the actual factions showdown. Who stands the best chance of victory? And I think we're off to a good one with this. So let's get started with, let's have a little discussion of what exactly are the Borg. The Borg exist in the Star Trek universe. They are a multi-species collective held together by a central consciousness that controls and guides all the drones that make up the greater population of the Borg. There are many trillions of drones and are thought to be perhaps millions of ships. Maybe not tens of millions, but certainly millions. The most common and most well-known form of Borg vessel is the Cube. This ship, without me doing math, so cube this if you wish to, is 3,000 meters by 3,000 meters by 3,000 meters. The dimensions of the ships don't really vary. The basic internal structure is the same, although the vessels do adapt to their respective situations. This vessel contains about 100,000 drones. The drones vary depending on mission-specific tasks that they were created for. You've got sort of maintenance, tactical, and even medical versions of them. So the drones have different purposes, and the kind of equipment and armaments they will have personally on them vary depending on this, but all are threatening. All of them have the same base abilities. A drone can analyze and adapt to a weapon. In other words, you shoot your weapon at one drone, the next one you hit with the same weapon, it might not work. So the Borg can adapt. They can also regenerate, meaning even if you kill the drone, it can come back. More importantly, the ship can regenerate. The physical technology can repair itself or be rapidly repaired using various different systems, not to mention assistance from the Borg themselves. The vessels are extremely heavily armed. Many cubes, it's been reported, have 38 disruptor arrays plus additional weapons, although again this can vary, with the Borg able to adapt and produce more weapons relatively quickly. There are of course variants of these cubes. You have the Class 4 Tactical Cube, which has enhanced armor, shielding and weaponry. There are the Borg Spheres, the Borg Tactical Spheres, Borg Probe ships, and a number of other vessels and ships like the Borg Queen's Diamond, although I think that's more of a reconnaissance command and escape ship than anything. The most common vessel is the Borg Standard Cube. It requires no extra engineering or anything to produce it. There are probably, I think it's a good guess to say, there are probably more spheres than there are cubes. They also have incredibly large space stations scattered all over the galaxy. So that's the basics of the Borg. In terms of how their command structure works, they don't really have one. They have a collective consciousness, although this does manifest in the form of the Borg Queen. The Borg Queen is not a true individual. may appear that way, but there's good evidence that there's actually at any given time more than one Borg Queen. A Borg Queen is not an independent entity of the collective. It is a manifestation, a representation of all of the drones. It does serve a command processing function and brings order to chaos, but is not a leader of the Borg per se, but also is because it's a manifestation of the collective. It doesn't really matter. The Queen can be killed and replaced just like any drone. So in that regard, she's not particularly special, but she is relevant for the drones that she is immediately controlling, and the Borg are disrupted with her destruction, albeit only temporarily. So now let's have a look at the Cybermen. Now, the Cybermen are equally complicated. They've been around since the dawn of time. They have, just like the Borg, they have some fearsome technology, including the ability to time travel that both factions have. So I don't think that's an advantage either side's going to have in this scenario. Physically, like the Borg, they are a cybernetic life form. Early versions of Cybermen came from the planet Mondas that blew up. Mondas was another planet in the Sol system that had evolved life similar to Earth, and it became the Cybermen, the Mondasian Cybermen. But I think, for simplicity, because the Cybermen have an incredibly complicated history, I think we should focus on the Cybermen that originated from another universe, created as part of the Cybers project. They could only convert, initially anyway, humans into their form, but that's really irrelevant. They can eventually convert others. We'll use them at the height of their technological capability that we saw them at. That, I think, gives them a better even footing with the Borg. The Cybermen in many ways are linked. They, like the Borg, although are more individualistic, they have all of their emotions removed and appear more robotic. They are linked together by not a collective consciousness, but an actual communication network that gives them real-time interaction and allows them to share information. It allows the cyber leaders and cyber controllers, which is the basic ranking system of them, all the way up to the sort of the Cyber King, who's the one who's in charge, usually, to control all the other Cybermen and their different factions. They can convert others using external sources similar to the Borg. They basically take you and they can either sort of weld, for lack of a better term, a cyber suit onto you and you integrate with it, or they can go as far as remove your brain and your central nervous system, and that's the only part of you they'll bother keeping. The rest might be completely discarded or used for some other purpose. The Cybermen do not wish to become machines, though. They want to take the best parts of the human or whatever they're converting, particularly the brain, and use it to make themselves better. Their objective is to upgrade the universe. The Borg's purpose is to harmonize the universe and make everyone like them, to enhance themselves. In some ways, the Cybermen are a little more altruistic because they actually believe they are assimilating you and making you better by making you a Cyberman. And yes, I use the word assimilate because the Cybermen also used that term at one point. The Borg also believe this, but to a different degree. They more do it because they believe it's enhancing themselves, and by becoming like them, you are being enhanced. The Cybermen actually believe that they are helping you by upgrading you to be like them. They think that organic and emotional is reckless and dangerous and painful and unstable, and being like them is safer and better and nicer. So again, it's kind of sweet and a little more altruistic in a really horrible kind of way. In terms of their technological capabilities, they, like the Borg, can adapt to a situation, although they can't analyze and adapt. They have to do it more systematically. Like the Borg, they can absorb technology from races that they conquer and use it to enhance themselves. For example, when you create the Cyber Lords, they absorb technology from the Time Lords and convert an actual Time Lord, a Gallifreyan, into a Cyberman, gaining their regenerative abilities. But that's only a limited number. That's unique to one race that they absorbed. It's not a technological thing. The Cybermen are a bit more technologically focused than the Borg, more interested in enhancing the technology than the organic within, not seeing as much value in it. But despite the limited number of Cybermen that had that same ability to regenerate, similar to a Borg, although in a much more advanced way, the Cybermen are able to take technology and use it to enhance themselves. They have demonstrated super speed technologies, dimension shifting, travel through time, teleportation, super strength, extremely advanced and complicated higher brain functions. In other words, they're all geniuses. They have demonstrated the ability to utilize and manipulate advanced weapons and technology to their own ends. This includes faster than light travel, shielding, advanced energy weapons, as well as a myriad of man-portable weapons that they can use against their enemies. They are, again, extremely strong, extremely resilient, and are very resistant to tampering, as they kind of just keep going. don't mind sacrifice, again, much like the Borg. So these two factions are not going to worry about losing numbers. And just like the Borg, basically the more people there are, the more Cybermen there can be. The more people they can convert, the greater the numbers become. And as a result, both factions probably number in the trillions. It's hard to say at any given time with the Cybermen. We do know that the human empire deemed the presence of a single Cyberman on a planet so much of a threat at the height of the war, they would blow up the entire planet. They would even go as far as to blow up the entire system if it was necessary. This resulted in the human empire's war on the Cybermen becoming so vicious that an entire galaxy would be burned and destroyed just to eliminate the cyber threat. Now this to some degree worked. I can imagine the Borg would find a different way, as the Borg would be able to assimilate Cybermen. They wouldn't necessarily want to simply eradicate them. But nonetheless, it shows you just how great of a threat the Cybermen were viewed. Now bear in mind, at that time, the Cybermen's main race they liked to absorb was humans, so from a human point of view, such extreme measures were very necessary. But the Cybermen had equally advanced and ferocious technology if that's what the humans deemed necessary to deal with them. Now, so if we're going to put these two up against each other, who the hell's going to win? Because the Borg have their transwarp drive, but we know that the FTL capabilities of the Cybermen was not too dissimilar. So in other words, running across the galaxy is no problem in this one. So they're both going to be able to attack each other's core territories. So how do they stack? First of all, let's start with the basic. Your average drone, both Cyberman and Borg. The average tactical drone has titanium armor as standard. The more advanced ones have built-in plasma or disruptor weaponry. They have personal shields that, although don't typically stop a weapon the first time, because of their ability to adapt, if you don't kill it, they will regenerate and the shield will adapt. You have to alter the frequencies and do all kinds of other crazy stuff to your weapons in order to keep harming that drone. They're able to regenerate from severe injury. They're pretty much immune to any kind of attack from chemical or biological weapons, and they can survive easily the exposure to space. They're incredibly durable and very hardy. Cybermen, very similar. They can survive exposure to space. They're very heavily armor plated. This varies depending on what they've particularly been made from, but one of the best metals they've been made from is something like neutronium. So they're pretty resistant as well to direct fire. The difference is a lot of them lack the critical ability to regenerate in the same way a Borg can, but they have demonstrated some limited ability in this area. They too are completely immune to biological or radiological attack, except for maybe the most advanced weapon systems produced by some of the most advanced races. So that could be something the Borg could use against the individual Cybermen, maybe. They're all linked together, so what one learns, the others all know. So any advantage a Cyberman finds out it has over a Borg, all the other Cybermen will find out, and vice versa. Cybermen, like the Borg, also tend to have built-in weaponry. This includes that if they can touch you, they can stun you or kill you, but they also have energy weapons, usually in the arms here, but they have been demonstrated on some occasions, some customized or unique version Cybermen with certain enhancements and other weapons. It's also not unusual for them to carry a weapon, although the Borg carrying weapons is more uncommon, but not unseen. There have been drones seen to be carrying weapons. The Borg do produce them, and they're more than willing to pick a weapon up if it was going to mean that they would win. So where do we stand on their ships? Cyber vessels again vary, but the most advanced ones we've seen quite large, although we don't know exactly how big. They lack a lot of the Borg's ability to analyze and adapt, but do have the same basic abilities. They carry missile weapon systems similar to the torpedoes used by the Borg. They have energy weapons of unknown type, but we can assume for the contest here that they're of a similar strength, at least to Borg disruptors. And they've got to be equally as well armed, although I do, only in my head, imagine these vessels are a little smaller than your average Borg ship. Now, how do these two factions go at each other? If they were to encounter each other, both factions would see the other one as like themselves. So there is actually every chance they'd just go, want to team up? Yeah, let's be like each other. But let's assume they don't do that. The Cybermen would see the Borg as not only similar, like they did with the Daleks, and perhaps want to team up, but when the Borg would reject that, the Cybermen, just like they did with the Daleks, would begin to attack them. Now, how this would go down would be the Borg would be wanting to assimilate the Cybermen. They would quickly realise that Cybermen were very difficult to assimilate, as there wasn't much organic material inside them to assimilate, so they'd be more interested in the technology. They would have some early success, as the Cybermen wouldn't be used to having to adapt their technology so quickly to the Borg. But the Cybermen are nothing if not adaptable. They can change and alter their tactics. They would realize that the Borg were resistant to much of their weaponry and would quickly begin to change it. They would resort to strategic weapons very quickly, which is something the Borg rarely do because the Borg prefer to assimilate, not destroy. Cybermen won't care about that. They will simply aim to destroy the Borg. So it will become a slugging match. The Borg will adapt to the Cybermen's weapons. The Cybermen will develop new weapons to destroy them. The Cybermen will start to hit very hard and very fast the core territories of the Borg, while the Borg will try to quickly respond to the onslaught of cyber vessels entering their space. The Cybermen might actually begin to turn the tide at this point because they'll go in with strategic weapons and just blow up the whole goddamn planet every time there's Borg, and it's just like the humans did with them. And adapt as they might want to do, the Borg's best adaptation in this moment would be to evacuate and get them out of the way. As we saw when they fought A472, the Borg are not able to get out of the way quick enough, but like A472, Cybermen would have more than enough technology to blow up the planet quickly. They go in, drop one planet-ending weapon, destroy the entire planet. That's kind of technology the Borg don't have. They would also turn weapons like this on the Borg ships themselves. Now, it's reasonable again to assume the Borg could adapt. One of the first things they do is probably start producing more heavily armoured and better shielded ships, like the Class 4 tactical cubes. It's also plausible that the Borg would resort to a tactic of swarm. They would be deploying probe ships and spheres in larger numbers. Armoured tactical spheres in particular would likely be a response, but if not, just lots of spheres, because these ships would waste the heavy ordnance of the Cybermen trying to destroy them. And the Borg could produce a lot of them very quickly, because the Borg are nothing if not industrious. It would literally come down to a slugging match. Who could kill more of the other one more rapidly? Neither side would gain numbers from assimilating the other. You can't turn a Borg into a Cyberman, you probably can't turn a Cyberman into a Borg, at least not easily. It might be plausible, but considering how adaptive cyber programming is, it could work almost like a virus. If the Borg actually tried to assimilate the Cybermen, they could find themselves infected, which would likely, in those early stages, cause a lot of disruption and bring chaos to order within the collective, giving the Cybermen that early opening to actually get in and start doing a lot of damage behind the scenes. The Borg would, though, be able to assimilate cyber technology and begin to rapidly adapt to it. As they retaliated and went after cyber bases, realizing this was an enemy they couldn't simply assimilate, they'd want to destroy, they would unleash similar weapons, probably simply copies of the Cybermen's weapons, not to mention other weapons we know the Borg to have. High-yield explosive devices, it's likely they have things like Thalaron weapons and trilithium weapons, although because I don't know that for a fact, we won't include those. However they do it, though, whether it be with their own brand-produced weapons of mass destruction, which again they likely do have, or with simply reverse-engineered and assimilated technology from the Cybermen, they would suddenly find that they have it. So any weapon the Cybermen used against them, they would be able to throw back at them. The Cybermen and the Borg would have to begin assimilating other races in order to increase their numbers, and it could even become an element of expending resources in futile border conflicts while they try to get the numbers to fight the enemy. Both sides would be whittled down, but I might have to leave this a little open-ended for you guys, because I actually can't think of a good winner, so this is going to come down to a gut feeling for me. And I'm going to go on the side of I think the Cybermen come out on top. And I know as a Star Trek fan, you might think that's what the fuck. But hear me out. The Borg have demonstrated on numerous occasions when they go up against a similar level power, sort of 10th level power like they are, they lose their ability, their advantage of adaptation, and assimilation stops working. And I don't think assimilating the Cybermen would work. And I think every time they would try, the Cybermen would infect them, just like they did with the Doctor, just like they do with others. Their technology is so impenetrable, it would be so alien to the Borg that if the Borg tried to assimilate it, it would literally be like a contagion, a bit like Unimatrix Zero. The Cybermen would become an internalized problem for the Borg, so they wouldn't assimilate them. We've seen that a single Cyberman has abilities far beyond those of your average drone, and would likely tear through them quite easily. The Borg are also a little bit more vulnerable to sort of more crude weaponry, projectile weapons and blades, which, although they can adapt by getting better armor or better shields, the Cybermen would easily exploit that weakness after they'd identified it. They would also be completely unafraid to use any level strategic weapon, which the Borg, although would probably rapidly start to do themselves. Both sides don't care about casualties. And I think cyber ships, although probably individually weaker than Borg vessels and probably only similar in number, they can build them faster. and they require fewer crews, they're lower maintenance. I think the Cybermans, although they would take huge casualties in a war with the Borg, I think they're coming out on top because of their ability to simply decimate their enemy, and the Borg's inability to likely deal with such an onslaught from an enemy that they simply wouldn't be used to dealing with. Because again, when they go up against powers like 8472 and even species 116, they struggle because those enemies rival them. And without overwhelming numbers like they did with 116, or without help like they did with 8472, the Borg struggle. And although they could assimilate cyber technology and again exploit weaknesses therein, and even copy a lot of it, the Cybermen will continue to adapt and also continue to evolve and develop, which is something the Borg can't do. The Borg would always basically then be on the response side of that. They'd basically, although they would be fighting an offensive war, they'd be doing it only by responding to how much more advanced the Cybermen keep getting than them. And the Cybermen would put huge amounts of their effort into developing technology, and as Janeway put it, the Borg assimilate, they don't develop. Or like humans do. Humans analyze and they develop things. I am paraphrasing Janeway a little bit here, but she basically said that. And that gave humans an advantage, just like it gave 8472, 116, and other races an advantage over the Borg. Because they can't assimilate it, they can't truly understand it. And they would have that problem with the Cybermen. And I think they come out on top. But let me know in the comments section below if you completely disagree with me and think that that's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. But let me know.